Sometimes, the deepest cracks in a relationship aren't caused by loud betrayals or explosive fights, but by quiet moments of disconnection, of not feeling seen, of wondering whether our emotional world is truly safe in the hands of someone we love. In my years of working with couples, I've seen how easily trust, so delicately built, can be shaken by even the simplest of actions. Not because love isn't present, but because understanding was missing. Today, I want to share the story of a couple named Laura and Michael. Their journey isn't dramatic in the way movies might portray, but it is deeply human. It's about a message sent, a heart hurt, and a choice, whether to walk away from the wound, or walk through it, together. This is their story, and through it, perhaps, you will find reflections of your own. Laura is 34, a communications manager in a mid-size marketing firm based in Seattle. She's the kind of woman who takes relationships seriously, loyal, thoughtful, and emotionally intuitive. Her husband, Michael, is 36 and works in IT at a tech startup. They met through mutual friends in their late 20s and were drawn to each other almost instantly. Their shared sense of humor, similar ambitions, and mutual support made the early years of their marriage feel like a strong partnership. But 8 years into their marriage, something shifted. It began subtly. Laura noticed Michael seemed distracted on his phone more often than usual. She dismissed it at first. They both led busy lives. And after a long day, scrolling through emails or reading the news didn't seem unusual. But one evening, as they sat side by side on the couch, a message popped up on Michael's phone, and Laura recognized the name immediately. It was his ex-girlfriend, Emma. Michael didn't hide it. In fact, when Laura asked, he admitted they had exchanged a few messages. According to him, it was innocent. He said Emma had reached out about an old mutual friend who was ill and that they'd only spoken a few times. But for Laura, it wasn't about the messages, it was about what those messages represented. Why didn't he tell her sooner? Why did he feel the need to continue that conversation instead of simply being polite and drawing a boundary? Laura felt a rush of betrayal, not necessarily because she believed Michael had cheated physically, but because emotionally, something sacred had been breached. The act of contacting an ex, no matter how harmless, triggered deep feelings of insecurity. For her, it raised questions. Was I not enough? Was he thinking about her? Why wasn't I included in that conversation? Michael, on the other hand, felt blindsided by Laura's reaction. To him, it was a casual reconnection, not a rekindling of romance. He insisted he loved Laura, that nothing between him and Emma remained unresolved emotionally. He said, "If I had thought it would hurt you, I never would have continued the chat. But I honestly didn't think it mattered." And that's the thing, what Michael saw as minor, Laura experienced as a major fracture in their bond. They began arguing frequently, not just about the texts, but about their values, their communication, and their emotional priorities. Laura began pulling back emotionally, while Michael became defensive, frustrated that his actions were being interpreted through a lens of betrayal. Both of them began to feel alone, Laura with her sadness and fear, Michael with his guilt and confusion. And so they came to therapy, not because of a dramatic affair, but because of a small moment that grew too big to ignore. The past had made its way into their present, and neither of them felt safe anymore. The first step in addressing this situation was naming what had actually happened, not just on the surface, but underneath. It wasn't just that Michael messaged an ex. It was that Laura experienced emotional abandonment, a sudden breach of the implicit contract that said, "You are my emotional home." For Michael, it wasn't about infidelity, it was about misreading the emotional weight of his actions. The healing had to begin with mutual understanding before any advice could take root. In our sessions, I asked them to go beyond accusations and instead speak from personal truth. Laura began using language like, "I felt," instead of, "You betrayed." And Michael learned to listen without immediately jumping into defense mode. That shift may sound simple, but it's often the most difficult for couples. When we feel accused, we instinctively armor up, but the real progress happens when we soften, even when it hurts. Here's one of the first practical tools I introduced to them: the transparency ritual. This is a weekly 30-minute conversation with 3 simple rules: no phones, no distractions, and no interruptions. The goal is to say, "Here is what's been on my heart this week," not as a performance, but as a bridge. Laura used it to express lingering worries without judgment. Michael used it to talk about his guilt and to reassure her, in words and actions, that his loyalty hadn't wavered. We also discussed boundaries, not rules, but mutually agreed upon emotional boundaries. Together, they decided that if either of them were contacted by a past partner, they would be transparent about it from the beginning. They also agreed to check in with each other emotionally before deciding how to respond. This wasn't about control, it was about restoring mutual safety. Another key practice was what I call shared repair. This means that both partners take ownership, not necessarily for wrongdoing, but for each other's healing. Michael began checking in more often, not because he was being monitored, but because he wanted Laura to feel seen again. He didn't just say, "I'm sorry," he followed through with gestures of presence, attention, and consistency. Laura, in turn, worked on acknowledging the difference between hurt and danger. Her pain was valid, but Michael wasn't her enemy. Once she began seeing him as a partner again, rather than a threat, their healing accelerated. 1 month into applying these practices, the energy in their home began to shift. They started having dinner together without tension. They laughed again, not performatively, but genuinely. Laura admitted she was still healing, but she no longer felt emotionally abandoned. Michael said he finally understood that emotional safety isn't about intentions, it's about impact. He realized that what he considered a harmless exchange had real emotional weight, and he committed to never undermining that trust again. There was a particularly moving moment when Laura looked at Michael and said, "I don't want to go back to the version of us before the messages. I want to go forward to a version where we know each other better." That's the heart of real repair, not erasing what happened, but using it to grow deeper roots. To couples facing something similar, I want to say this: when the past knocks on your door, how you answer together will determine your future. If your partner contacts an ex and it triggers a breach of trust, it doesn't mean the relationship is doomed. It does mean you must be willing to rebuild intentionally. Trust isn't a switch, it's a garden. It needs tending. It needs truth, vulnerability, and a commitment to show up even when things are messy. What helped Laura and Michael wasn't perfection, it was presence. It wasn't dramatic declarations, it was the small, quiet promises they kept every day. They rebuilt their marriage not by forgetting what happened, but by choosing who they wanted to become after it. And finally, let me leave you with this: intimacy isn't the absence of mistakes. It's the ability to repair with tenderness when mistakes inevitably arise. If you are in a relationship where you've been hurt, ask yourself not only, can I trust them again? But also, are we willing to do the work to trust each other better? For Laura and Michael, the answer was yes. And for many couples, that answer can still be yes, even after trust is shaken, if you are both willing to listen, to learn, and to lead with love. If something in this video resonated with your heart, please don't forget to hit like and subscribe to our channel. And if you carry a story you wish to tell, feel free to leave it in the comments below. We promise to receive your words with tenderness and deep respect. Until next time, may you continue your journey with strength and hope.